Christmas morning arrived quietly at the Bronx Zoo, the kind of cold New York morning where the air feels clean and sharp, and your breath lingers just long enough to remind you that you're alive. The sun hadn't fully climbed yet, but the crowd was already gathering, parents holding paper cups of coffee, grandparents wrapped in scarves, children tugging at mittens with nervous excitement. In the center of it all sat Asante, 400 pounds of silverback muscle, wide chest, thick arms folded loosely against his body. He didn't move. Brightly wrapped Christmas presents lay scattered across the habitat floor, red paper, green ribbons, bells tied with twine. The keepers had arranged them carefully, hoping for the usual reaction: tearing, tossing, playful chaos. Cameras were ready. Phones were raised. Nothing happened. A child whispered, "Is he sleeping?" "No," a woman murmured back. "He is watching." Michael Turner stood just behind the safety barrier, hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. He'd worked with gorillas for 15 years, long enough to recognize the silence before a storm or before something entirely unexpected. "Come on, big guy," he said, quietly, more to himself than to Asante. They were just presents. Another keeper leaned in. "You think he lions? Ignore them." Michael didn't answer. He'd learned a long time ago not to predict Asante. The silverback's dark eyes moved slowly across the scene, not to the biggest box, not to the brightest ribbon. He looked past the gifts, past the people, as if weighing the room itself. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable, now unsure why this felt different from the cheerful spectacle they'd expected. Then Asante moved. Not fast, not with excitement. He leaned forward, placed his knuckles on the ground, and rose. With deliberate control, the sheer size of him drew a quiet gasp from the crowd. A few people instinctively stepped back. He walked toward the nearest present. Michael held his breath. Instead of tearing into the box, Asante stopped. He nudged it once with the side of his hand, as if testing its weight. Then, to everyone's confusion, he picked it up carefully and carried it across the habitat. A woman near the front frowned. "Where is he taking it?" Asante stopped beside a smaller gorilla sitting alone near the rock wall. The younger one kept his eyes low, shoulders rounded inward, a posture Michael recognized all too well. Before anyone could react, Asante gently pushed the gift toward him. The box slid across the dirt and came to rest at the younger gorilla's feet. The crowd went silent. "He gave it away," someone whispered. Michael felt his throat tighten. "Yeah," he said softly, "he did." The younger gorilla hesitated, glancing up at Asante, as if waiting for permission. Asante didn't move. He didn't assert himself. He simply sat down nearby, present, but not imposing. Only then did the younger gorilla reach for the box. The moment cracked, something open in the crowd. A man in his late 50s wiped his eyes. Quickly, embarrassed, a woman clasped her husband's arm a little tighter. The kids, sensing something important but not fully understanding it, had gone quiet. "That's not normal, is it?" someone asked. Michael shook his head slowly. "No, it is not." Asante turned back toward the pile of remaining gifts. He didn't rush. He didn't compete. He moved with intention, selecting another box. Not the largest, not the one that smelled strongest of treats. This one was modest, wrapped in simple brown paper. Again, he carried it away, this time toward a different gorilla, older, more assertive one who had been pacing the edge of the group, restless, testing boundaries. The tension between them was subtle but unmistakable, a challenge unspoken. Michael felt his chest tighten. "Easy," he murmured. "Easy." Asante stopped a few feet away and placed the gift down between them. He didn't bare his teeth, didn't he puff his chest. He sat, eyes steady, posture calm. The other gorilla stared at the box, then at Asante. Seconds stretched. The crowd barely breathed. Finally, the other gorilla reached out, not aggressively, but cautiously, and touched the ribbon. The tension dissolved like fog in sunlight. A low murmur rippled through the spectators. A man near Michael shook his head in disbelief. "That's leadership," he said quietly. "That's real leadership." Michael swallowed hard. He'd spent years explaining gorilla behavior to visitors, translating science into simple words, but no explanation could compete with what they were seeing now. Asante returned to the center of the habitat and sat down again. "Only 2 gifts remain," one of the keepers whispered. "Is he saving one for himself?" "Michael, watch closely. Maybe," he said, "or maybe not." Asante reached for the 3rd gift, lifted it, and paused. He looked around, not at the gorillas this time, but toward the humans, toward the glass, toward Michael. For a brief electric moment, their eyes met. Michael felt the weight of it press into his chest. He'd shared countless mornings with Asante, countless routines and quiet observations. But this felt different, intentional. Asante turned away and placed the gift near a group of younger gorillas who immediately clustered around it, the energy shifting from scattered to shared. Laughter broke out among the crowd, not the loud, careless kind, but something warmer, softer. Only one gift remained now, the biggest one. Bright red paper, a bow so oversized it looked almost ridiculous against the winter gray habitat. Asante approached it slowly. A child whispered, "This one is his." Michael felt the same certainty after everything Asante had done. Surely this was the moment he'd take something for himself. Asante stood over the box for a long moment. Then, without opening it, without touching the bow, he stepped past it. He walked away. The red box sat alone in the dirt, untouched. The silence that followed was heavier than before. A woman near the back spoke, her voice barely above a breath. "Why didn't he take it?" Michael stared at the box, his eyes burning. "Because," he said slowly, choosing his words with care. "Sometimes taking isn't the point." Asante climbed onto a low rock and settled there, overseeing the group as they shared, played, and explored. The chaos everyone had expected never came. In its place was something quieter, something almost reverent. Christmas music drifted faintly from the zoo entrance. The crowd stood frozen, caught between wonder and reflection. Michael exhaled finally, realizing his hands were shaking. In 15 years of working with gorillas, he had never seen anything like this, and he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that none of them would forget this morning. Not the people, not the gorillas, and not the quiet giant who had just redefined what it meant to love a gift long before the Christmas morning that would quietly change everyone who witnessed it. Asante had already learned something most humans hope never to understand, to deeply loss. Michael Turner still remembered the day Asante arrived at the Bronx Zoo. It wasn't dramatic. No crowds, no cameras, just a transport crate, a stack of paperwork, and a silverback who refused to make eye contact. Asante sat, pressed against the back wall of the crate, arms wrapped around himself, breathing slow and heavy. He didn't roar. He didn't pound his chest. He simply endured. "That one has been through a lot," one of the vets said under their breath. Michael nodded. He'd read the reports: habitat destruction, forced relocation, fragmented groups. Words that sounded clinical on paper, but meant everything had been taken from this animal family familiarity control before he ever had a chance to choose. What the reports didn't explain was the other gorilla. His name had been Kivu. Kivu arrived months earlier, younger but confident, with a restless curiosity that filled every space he entered. When Asante was introduced into the habitat, there was tension at first, careful, circling, posturing, the kind of cautious distance that comes when two powerful beings test whether the world is safe. Again, then slowly something shifted. Michael watched it happen over weeks. Kivu would sit near Asante without touching him. Asante would tolerate it, then accept it. Soon they began sharing routines, eating near each other, resting in parallel silence, communicating in low private sounds that never carried far. They developed small rituals. Kivu liked to drag objects around the habitat, branches, old enrichment tow, even scraps of fabric. One afternoon, a researcher accidentally left behind a faded blue cloth. Kivu claimed it, immediately draping it over his shoulder like a prize. Over time, it became his signature. Wherever Ku went, the cloth followed. Asante noticed everything. Sometimes Michael would catch him watching Kivu from across that habitat, eyes soft, posture relaxed, not dominant, not submissive, something closer to protective. Looks like he has got his brother back, another keeper once said. Michael didn't argue. Then, one winter, Kivu fell ill. At first, it was subtle, a slower walk, less interest in food, longer periods of stillness. The veterinary team worked tirelessly, adjusting diets, monitoring vitals, staying late into the night. Asante never left Kivu's side. When the decision was finally made, one no one ever wants to make, Michael stood outside the habitat, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, watching Asante sit beside Kivu. The blue cloth lay between them, rumpled and worn. After Ku was gone, the habitat felt wrong, too quiet, too empty. Asante searched. For days he walked the perimeter, stopping at every corner, every doorway, every familiar resting place. He checked behind rocks. He returned to feeding areas long after the others had left. He sat where Kivu used to sit and waited. Michael spoke to him more than usual, even though he knew the words wouldn't translate the way he wished they could. "I know," he'd say softly, "I know." Asante's appetite faded. His posture changed. Shoulders slumped, movements slower, as if the weight he carried was no longer just muscle and bone. The other gorillas sensed it. Interactions became tentative. Space widened. Grief, Michael learned, doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like absence. Weeks later, Michael noticed the blue cloth again. Asante had picked it up, folding it clumsily, then carrying it to a quiet corner. He didn't play with it. He didn't shred it. He simply held it, fingers tracing the edges, breathing steady but heavy. The researchers documented the behavior carefully, choosing their language with caution. Attachment, memory, stress response. Michael chose different words. "He misses him," he said. Asante carried that loss with him for years. He never stopped functioning. He ate. He interacted. He asserted himself when necessary, but something fundamental had changed. He became quieter, more observant, less interested in dominance displays, more invested in watching how others moved, where tensions formed, where support was needed. Michael noticed something else, too. Asante became deliberate. Every action seemed measured, as if he'd learned that nothing, not comfort, not companionship, could be taken for granted. He paid attention to who was alone, who hesitated before approaching food, who lingered at the edges of the group. On particularly cold mornings, Michael would arrive early before the zoo opened and find Asante already awake, sitting upright, scanning the habitat like a sentinel, still watching out for them. RNTU, Michael once murmured, "Acid didn't he respond, but he didn't he need to." Researchers often debate how much emotion to attribute to animals like gorillas. Michael had learned to stay out of those arguments. He didn't he need labels. He only needed to watch. Loss had taught Asante something rare, that strength wasn't proven by how much space you took up, but by how much you protected. By the time Christmas came, the loss wasn't fresh anymore. It had settled into him, shaped him, become part of the quiet gravity he carried. The gifts on the habitat floor that morning weren't the beginning of Asane's story, they were the result of it. Because long before he ever chose to give something away, Asane had learned what it felt like when something irreplaceable was taken. As the last scraps of wrapping paper settled and the early excitement softened into something quieter, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Asante was not choosing at random. Michael Turner leaned closer to the glass, his eyes following every movement. He had seen dominant silverbacks claim resources their entire lives: food first, space first, attention first. What Asante was doing now followed a different logic, one Michael didn't have a word for yet. Asante moved slowly through the remaining gifts, not with hunger or urgency, but with attention. He paused near each box, tilting his head slightly, listening to the subtle sounds inside, not the rattle of treats, not the scent of fruit, but something else. Weight, texture, resistance. He stopped beside a juvenile gorilla who hovered at the edge of the group, half committed to joining, half prepared to retreat. The younger gorilla's body told a familiar story: shoulders, tight movements, hesitant eyes, constantly checking for approval or threat. Asane sat down. First, he didn't loom. He didn't block the path. He simply lowered himself to the ground and placed a medium-sized package between them. The ribbon brushed the dirt as he nudged it forward. Then he leaned back deliberately, creating space. The juvenile froze. Michael felt his own muscles tense in response. This was the moment where confidence was either built or broken. Seconds passed. The younger gorilla glanced up at Asante, then down at the box, then back again. Asante didn't move. His posture stayed open, relaxed, patient. Finally, the juvenile reached out, not fast, not timid, just enough. The box shifted, the ribbon came loose, the sound of paper tearing echoed softly across the habitat. The juvenile's shoulders lifted, not defensively, but with something closer to pride. To quiet breath moved through the crowd. That as encouragement. Michael whispered almost involuntarily, "That's how you build confidence." Asante stood and walked away before the moment could turn into dependence. He didn't linger for credit. He didn't supervise the unwrapping. He trusted the process. The next gift was heavier. Asante approached a larger gorilla, stronger, younger, restless. This one had been testing boundaries for weeks, pacing the habitat's edges, asserting presence without clear purpose, the kind of energy that left unchecked turns into conflict. Michael stiffened, careful, he muttered. Asane stopped a few feet away and placed the gift down, not directly in front of the other gorilla, but slightly off to that side. Not a challenge, not an offering, an invitation. The younger gorilla bristled, chest rising, eyes sharp. The crowd felt it too, an invisible line tightening between them. Asante sat. He didn't break eye contact. He didn't advance. He simply waited. Michael realized then what was happening. This wasn't generosity. This was leadership. Under pressure, the younger gorilla circled the box once, twice the tension, threatened to spill over. But instead of erupting, it stalled. The box had become a problem to solve, not a resource to fight over. The younger gorilla reached down, tested the lid, pulled at the tape. The effort required focus, patience, thought. The aggression drained out of him, replaced by concentration. Asante stood satisfied and moved on. Michael exhaled slowly. He realized he'd been holding his breath. You redirected him, he said softly, knowing Asante couldn't understand the words, but feeling compelled to speak them anyway. You gave him something better to do. The remaining gifts were fewer now. The habitat felt different, lighter, steadier. The gorillas moved with less friction, less competition. Even the sounds had changed. Fewer sharp vocalizations, more low murmurs, cooperative play where there had once been caution. Asante approached another box, smaller this time. He carried it toward a cluster of younger gorillas who had begun to gather together, drawn by the shift in energy. Instead of choosing one, he set the box down in the middle of them and stepped back. The effect was immediate. No one claimed ownership. No one rushed to dominate. They worked around it together, hands overlapping, movements awkward but synchronized, laughter-like sounds punctuating the effort. Michael felt his chest tighten. That is communal, he said quietly. He just turned a prize into a shared experience. Asante watched from a distance, eyes alert, posture calm. He didn't intervene. He didn't correct. He trusted what he'd already set in motion. And then there was nothing left to give except the one box, the largest, the brightest, the one everyone assumed had been meant for him. Asante approached at last. Michael saw the hesitation ripple through the crowd again, felt it rise in his own chest. This was the moment people had been waiting for, whether they realized it or not. Asante stood over the box, towering silver for catching the pale winter light. He lowered his head, studying it. The boat trembled slightly in the cold breeze. He placed a hand on the top of the box, then he removed it. He stepped back and walked away. The decision landed heavier than any action before it. Asante climbed onto the highest rock in the habitat and sat there overlooking the group, not as an owner surveying possessions, but as a guardian ensuring balance. The gorillas below him continued to play, explore, rest. The box remained untouched, vivid against the muted earth. Michael felt a strange ache behind his eyes. He didn't need it, he said quietly, though no one had asked. That's the point. The realization settled slowly, deeply. Asante had not given gifts because he lacked desire. He had given them because he understood priority in choosing others first, in redirecting tension, in encouraging confidence and cooperation. Asante had done what the strongest leaders do when they truly understand their role. He didn't take what he could, he gave what was needed, and in that choice, quiet, deliberate, unmistakable, the silverback redefined power for everyone watching. No one had come to the Bronx Zoo that morning expecting to learn anything about themselves. They came for the same reasons people always do on Christmas week: tradition, distraction, something wholesome to share with family before life pulled everyone back in different directions. They came with coffee cooling in their hands, phones half-charged, minds already drifting toward errands and dinner plans. What they didn't expect was silence after the movement settled, after the sharing replaced competition. The crowd stood unusually still. No one was rushing to leave. No one was speaking over anyone else. It was as if the space itself had asked for quiet. Michael Turner noticed it before anyone else did. He spent his career reading animals, but that morning he found himself reading people instead. Grown men with folded arms, slowly letting them drop. Women leaning forward without realizing it. Teenagers lowering their phones not to record but simply to watch. A man near the railing cleared his throat. He looked to be in his early 60s, shoulders squared in a way that suggested years of military posture. A veteran, Michael guessed. The man stared at Asante for a long moment, jaw tight. "That's not weakness," the man said quietly, almost to himself. "That's discipline." The woman standing beside him nodded. "That's restraint." A few feet away, a father crouched beside his daughter, one hand resting on her back. "You see that," he whispered. "He has taken care of everybody." The girl didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her eyes were fixed on Asante, wide and blinking. Michael felt a strange pressure behind his ribs. He'd given hundreds of talks, answered thousands of questions about gorilla behavior, conservation, enrichment. None of those explanations had ever landed this deeply. Asante sat elevated on a low rock, now overseeing the habitat. Without tension, his posture wasn't rigid, it was settled. The younger gorillas moved freely, their energy balanced, their play less frantic, more cooperative. Then Asante made a sound. It wasn't loud. It didn't echo. It wasn't the kind of vocalization that makes people flinch or step back. It was low, steady, almost like a vibration. Felt more than heard, a deep hum that rolled out of his chest and lingered in the air. Conversation stopped entirely. Michael felt it resonate through the glass, through the ground, through him. He'd heard variations of that sound before, but never like this. Not here, not now. "That's not aggression," he said softly, answering a question no one had asked. "That's communication." A woman near the back pressed a hand to her mouth. "It sounds calm." "It is," Michael replied. "It's reassurance." The hum faded, and with it the last trace of Hanny's in the habitat. The gorilla settled. Some rested, some explored. The moment passed without ceremony, without applause. That's when Michael noticed the red box. It still sat exactly where it had been placed, right, perfectly wrapped and touched. A few people pointed it out. "He didn't open that one," someone said. Michael followed their gaze. He hadn't realized how much that box mattered until now. It represented expectation, reward, the assumption that after giving something must be taken in return. Michael shook his head slowly. He saw it. "So why didn't he take it?" the woman asked. Michael searched for an answer that didn't feel like a lecture. Didn't turn the moment into something clinical or forced? Because he said at last, sometimes leadership means leaving something behind. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise the crowd. A man in his 40s let out a quiet laugh, not amused, recognizing. Wish more people understood that. The comment hung there unchallenged. Michael thought about his own life, the early mornings, the missed holidays, the constant responsibility of caring for animals who could never fully understand the systems built around them. He thought about how often strength was measured by visibility, by nose dominance, taking up space, and here was Asante dismantling that idea without effort. The realization settled over the crowd, slowly, differently for each person. For some, it was about parenting. For others, marriage, work, authority, loss. A woman near the exit wiped her eyes and laughed at herself. I didn't come here to feel like this, she said to no one. In particular, Michael smiled faintly. None of us ever do. As the morning edged toward noon, keepers began their routines again. The crowd thinned. Reluctantly, people lingering longer than planned, a few stopped to thank Michael on their way out. That was something one man said, offering a firm handshake. Michael nodded. It was when the last of the visitors disappeared. The habitat felt larger, quieter. The red box remained where it was. Michael stepped closer to the glass. Asante looked down from his rock eyes, meeting Michael S. again. There was no urgency in the look, no demand, just awareness. Michael felt his chest tighten. You left that one for us, didn't you? He said under his breath. Asante didn't move. He didn't need to. The gift wasn't the box. It was the pause it created, the mirror it held up, the uncomfortable, necessary question it forced into the open. What would happen if we stopped measuring success by what we claimed and started measuring it by what we allowed others to have? Michael stayed there a long time after the gates closed, listening to the quiet rhythms of the habitat. He spent years teaching visitors about gorillas. That day, one gorilla had taught all of them something else entirely, not with force, not with spectacle, but with restraint, intention, and a choice not to take. The video didn't explode overnight. That surprised everyone. In the first few hours after Christmas morning, it lived quietly on a local zoo page, shared mostly by families who recognized themselves somewhere in the crowd. A mother tagged her sister. A grandfather sent it to his son with no caption at all. A veteran posted it late at night with the words, "Watch this when you have time." Then something shifted. By the next afternoon, the comments changed tone. People weren't just reacting anymore. They were reflecting. I didn't expect to cry over a gorilla. This made me rethink how I lead my team. My dad passed last year. This hit harder than I thought. The clip began traveling first across states, then across countries. News outlets picked it up, but not for the usual reasons. There was no scandal, no outrage, no debate, just a quiet question echoing through millions of screens. Why did this feel so important? Michael Turner found out about the attention the same way he learned about most things, by accident. A colleague held up a phone during a morning briefing. "You might want to see this," she said. Michael watched the clip again, this time on a screen too small to hold what it carried. He saw Asante move with the same deliberate calm. He saw the red box left untouched. He saw the crowd fall silent. He felt it again in his chest. "That's not how this was supposed to go," he murmured. Within a week, emails arrived from educators, therapists, veterans groups, church leaders. They weren't asking about gorillas. They were asking about leadership, about grief, about restraint. One message stood out. A man in Ohio wrote that he watched the video with his adult son after years of barely speaking. They didn't discuss it right away. They didn't need to. The next morning, his son called him first. Michael sat with that email longer than the rest. At the zoo, things changed too, subtly but unmistakably. The enrichment team expanded their programs, focusing not just on stimulation, but on social balance. Visitors arrived with different questions now. Was he always watch out for the others? Did he really leave that gift on purpose? What do you think he was feeling? Michael answered honestly when he could. When he couldn't, he listened. Asante didn't change. That was perhaps the most grounding part of it all. He didn't perform again. He didn't repeat the moment. He simply continued being who he was, attentive, measured, present, the habitat settled into a rhythm shaped by quiet trust rather than hierarchy. In January, snow dusted the outer edges of the zoo, turning the walkways pale, and still fewer visitors came now. The holidays had passed. Life had resumed. One morning before the gates opened, Michael stood alone near the glass. Asante sat across the habitat, hands resting on the ground, breath visible in the cool air. Michael hadn't planned to say anything. He rarely did when no one was around, but the silence felt earned. "They were still talking about you," he said softly. "You know that?" Asante turned his head slightly. Michael smiled to himself. "You gave them something they didn't know they needed." He paused, then added, "You gave me something too." Asante didn't respond. He didn't need to. He shifted closer to the glass, stopping just short of it, close enough to acknowledge, not close enough to intrude. Michael rested his palm against the barrier. For a moment, the distance between species felt less like a wall and more like a shared understanding of boundaries. The red box never returned to the habitat. It wasn't forgotten either. It became a quiet symbol among the keepers, a reminder written into training manuals, into conversations, into how decisions were made, sometimes leaving something untouched carries more meaning than claiming it ever could. The video continued its slow journey through the world, surfacing in places Michael never expected: corporate seminars, support groups, living rooms during late night conversations when defenses were already lowered. People didn't share it because it was shocking. They shared it because it felt true. Asante never knew how far that Christmas morning traveled. He never needed to. His world was measured in smaller, steadier ways. Who felt safe, who felt seen, who was allowed space, and maybe that was the lesson. People kept coming back to. Strength doesn't announce itself. Love doesn't demand credit. Leadership doesn't always take. Sometimes it watches. It waits, it gives, and when the moment comes, it knows when to walk past the brightest gift and leave it behind. That Christmas, a gorilla didn't change the world. He reminded it of something it had almost forgotten. As the last echoes of that Christmas morning fade, what remains is not a viral clip, not a headline, and not even the image of a silverback sitting among unopened gifts. What remains is a story about character, quiet, steady, and earned over time. Asante never set out to teach a lesson. He didn't know there were cameras. He didn't understand Christmas the way humans do. He didn't recognize the symbolism of wrapping paper or bows, or the expectations placed on a moment designed for spectacle. All he knew was the world in front of him, a group that depended on balance, a history shaped by loss, and a responsibility that came not from force but from awareness. His journey did not begin with generosity. It began with disruption, with displacement, with a kind of loss that strips everything familiar away and leaves behind a choice: either harden against the world or learn how to protect what remains. Over time, Asante chose the second path, not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently. That choice shaped him into something rare. When Christmas arrived at the Bronx Zoo, the gifts placed before him were never really the point. They were a test of instinct, a mirror held up to power. And in that moment, Asante revealed the kind of strength most of us spend our lives trying to understand. He did not rush. He did not take. He did not assert himself to prove anything. Instead, he watched. He noticed who needed reassurance, who needed encouragement, and who needed space to redirect tension. Rather than escalate it, he gave without expecting acknowledgement. He led without demanding submission. And when the brightest, most tempting gift was left untouched, he made a statement far more powerful than any display of dominance could ever be. The world noticed because it recognized something familiar in Asante restraint. People saw their own struggles, parents juggling responsibility and exhaustion, leaders questioning whether authority must always come with control, individuals carrying grief quietly, learning how to show up for others without fully healing themselves. This is why the moment traveled so far, not because it was extraordinary in the way spectacle is extraordinary, but because it was honest. It revealed the truth many people feel but rarely see modeled, that real leadership is often quiet and real. Strength is measured by what we choose not to take. There is a lesson here that reaches far beyond a zoo enclosure. In a world that constantly encourages us to claim more attention, more recognition, more control, Asante's story offers a different metric for success. It asks us to consider the power of restraint, the influence of patience, the long-term impact of protecting the well-being of others, even when no one is watching. Applying this lesson doesn't require grand gestures. It can begin in small, deliberate ways. It looks like listening before reacting, like choosing not to escalate a conflict even when you're capable of winning it, like leaving room for others to grow rather than filling every space yourself. In families, it means guiding without suffocating. In workplaces, it means leading without intimidating. In moments of grief, it means allowing yourself to feel while still offering stability to those around you. Asante teaches us that presence matters more than performance, that trust is built not through force but through consistency, and that sometimes the most meaningful contribution we make is stepping back so someone else can step forward. For those in the 35 to 60 age range, this message lands differently. By this stage in life, many have carried responsibility long enough to understand its weight. They have experienced loss, disappointment, and the realization that power alone does not create peace. Asante's story doesn't offer a quick fix. It offers validation and a reminder that wisdom often arrives quietly. The Christmas moment that captured the world as attention wasn't about gifts. It was about choice, and that choice continues to ripple outward long after the camera stopped rolling. If this story moved you, if it gave you pause, or if it reminded you of the kind of person you want to be in moments that truly matter, then you already understand why stories like this deserve to be told. By subscribing to this channel, you're not just supporting content, you're supporting stories that slow us down, challenge our assumptions, and remind us of values we don't want to lose. Stories that don't shout but stay with us, stories that make room for reflection in a world that rarely stops. If you believe there is still power in quiet strength, still meaning in empathy, and still hope in the lessons we can learn from unexpected places, then subscribe, stay with us, and help this channel continue bringing thoughtful, meaningful stories to life. Because sometimes the most important voices aren't the loudest, and sometimes the greatest lessons come from those who choose to leave the brightest gift behind.